Hey, good morning, good afternoon, good evening. How's everybody doing today? Look at that. Second time in a row that I don't forget to unmute. I am proud of myself today. Hopefully, I don't forget to screen share unlike last time. But yeah, thanks everybody for joining us for another live stream. This is like our fifth live stream, I think. We're on a roll. We're going to keep these going every single week. And so if you're joining us again, then thanks for coming back. If this is your first time, welcome. Actually, let me know in chat. Let me know in comments. Have you attended our live streams before? If so, I'd love to hear it. And if this is your very first live stream, the cyber live streams, then let me know in the comments as well. I'm just curious to hear. Let me close out a couple windows here. I've got way too many tabs, way too many windows going on. But let me clean up my workspace and then we'll get started in just a couple of minutes, give a chance for everybody to join in. And so I'll give you a quick rundown of what we're going to be doing today, and then we'll dive right in. So we're going to be talking about discovering AWS Organization IDs via S3 buckets. And this is a really fun lab. And the reason I decided to live stream this one is because it's one of our most popular labs. I think it's like top 10, maybe even top 7 popular labs on the platform. And it's a free lab. So anybody that's watching this right now can create a free cyber account and you can just join in and try this lab for free. You don't have to have any credit card or anything like that. And so it's just easily accessible. It's a lot of fun. And we've had a lot of people go through it and give really good feedback. So I'll kind of give some background about how this works, why this is possible, when you might want to use something like this. And then we'll actually demonstrate it live on stream here and see how to use automated enumeration tools to get this kind of information. And then we'll go a step deeper and we'll actually take a look at CloudTrail logs to understand what's going on behind the scenes and maybe also how you could detect something like this. And then finally, we'll actually take a look at the source code of the enumeration tool that makes this possible. And we'll deep dive into it and understand how the source code works itself. So lots of stuff to cover today. I'm going to kind of go through it really quickly, at least the first half where we're demonstrating this tool. And the reason for that is because, like I said, you can access this lab for free. So if you want to take your time going through it, get a little bit more details, you can do that on your own time as well. And then we've got more time to do a little bit more advanced stuff that's not covered in the lab itself. So hopefully that makes sense. Hopefully that gets you pumped and excited. I'm definitely pumped and excited to get this going. Yeah. Thanks for joining in. I appreciate it. These are always super fun. I've been having a blast doing these live streams every single week. So thanks for joining in. I wouldn't be doing these if you weren't joining me. So thank you for that. And then welcome. I see we've got a first timer here. Thanks for joining us. Nice to have you. We've got more people tuning in. We've got over, I think, 15 people between YouTube and LinkedIn. So drop me some comments. I'm only seeing one comment. Come on, guys. Let's go. Let's get this going. Let's get pumped. I'm probably a little bit too pumped. I think my coffee is kicking in, so that's probably why. Cool. So let me screen share here. Let me make sure that this is all visible and ready to go. And then we'll get started. So what's funny about this UI is every time I do this, I swear it looks a little bit different. There we go. Okay, yeah. I just have to switch it back to this. Hold on one sec. Okay, here we go. I'll eventually get the hang of this UI. I swear it's probably a skills issue, but I feel like it's also not the most intuitive live streaming software out there. Okay, so I should be screen sharing now. Let me know if you're not able to see this, and I'll tweak some stuff and make sure that it works before we keep going. Can I make this bigger? Yeah, I can make this bigger. Let's go with 100%. Whoops, that is not what I meant to do. Let's go with 100%. Let me know if this is still too small. And then especially when I'm doing the terminal commands, drop me a comment if you're not able to see what's on screen, and I'll be sure to zoom in a little bit more. But hopefully you're able to see this. Cool, Gabriel. I love the enthusiasm. I'm glad to see you're pumped as well. Okay, cool. You can see. Thanks. Appreciate the comments. Appreciate it, guys. It's always helpful to know if you're able to see my stuff or not, or if I'm just talking to myself. So like I said, today we're going to be talking about discovering AWS Organization IDs via S3 buckets, but I want to give a little bit more contextual information and background. So let's talk about our scenario today. This can go a few different ways, but just to make it more interesting, we'll pretend that we're conducting a basic pen test for a client. And so they've actually given us IAM user credentials. So you can see that in the diagram over here. You've got an IAM user in account A, and then that IAM user is receiving or has received access keys. And so that simulates our lab environment, which is going to give us access keys. And then through enumeration, we also discovered that we have the ability to assume an IAM role. Again, all in the same account, all within AWS account A. Now, this simulates either, like I said, a client giving you those credentials where they've hired you, they want you to do a security assessment analysis, and they've given you certain credentials, and then you did some enumeration, you found the role, et cetera, et cetera. Or it could also simulate maybe you found these credentials through security research on GitHub or something like that, and you're just doing some basic enumeration to figure out what's going on and if there's something that you need to report either to AWS or the account holder. And so you discovered these access keys, say on GitHub or somewhere else. Maybe somebody got phished, whatever the reason may be. And again, you discover this IAM role. And as you discover this IAM role, we'll see this in the lab that I'll demonstrate. You will enumerate policies and permissions related to that role, and you'll discover that it has access to an S3 bucket that belongs to a different account. So we have account A here, and then we have account 703 ... Doesn't matter what the account ID is. We've got an S3 bucket that's stored in a separate AWS account. So at this point, you're kind of curious to know who that bucket belongs to. Does it belong, since it's in a different account, does it belong to the same organization that you're currently in? Does it belong to a third-party organization? How do you know? Well, you can enumerate the account ID, the organization ID, and you can compare that organization ID to your client's ID and see if they match up or if they're different. It's just good information to have and to perform as part of your operation here. So that's kind of the overall scenario that we'll be looking at today. And I've kind of outlined the same information on this slide here. So pretty straightforward, not too much going on, helps us kind of focus on the main goal here. And so our learning objectives are going to be to start how to learn how to implement this automation enumeration tool. Now, this is a specific tool called conditional love that I'll show you in just a minute, but this kind of builds our muscle memory, how to use these types of automated tools to run other sorts of enumeration in the cloud as well. And then we'll also learn and understand how this AWS Organization ID enumeration technique works behind the scenes, like how and why is this possible? That's really important to understand. Third, we'll actually analyze the CloudTrail logs behind the scenes so that we can see exactly what the tool is doing with different policies and how this is made possible. And then finally, we'll wrap up by examining the conditional love tool source code, actually peeling back the covers and taking a look at how that source code works. So those are going to be our 4 main learning objectives for today, which is a lot to cover. So let's not waste time. Let's go ahead and get started. In a different tab, I've got my lab here. And so a couple of things. Yes, I will be sharing the slide link. That slide link will have a link to this lab here, so you can easily go to that. I'll do that at the very end because you don't need to launch it right now. Just pay attention to what I'm doing. And then after the fact, you can launch it if you want to. So I'll reserve that for the very end. But don't worry, I'll be giving you all these links at the end. And that link will lead you to this lab. Once you've created a free account, you can click on Start Lab. This lab only takes about 1 to a minute and a half. Whoops. Oh, I think it's because I've set up through a VPN, so 1 sec. Hopefully my VPN will not mess things up. If it does, then I'll switch over. Okay, so hopefully the VPN doesn't cause more issues here. If not, no worries. I'll disable all that. But long story short, you'll click on Start Lab. It'll take about a minute and a half. And then once it's done, then it'll display credentials here. While we're waiting for that, I want to take you over to that tool that I was talking about. So this is a tool called Conditional Love. And I'm going to check in on chat, make sure everybody can still see fine. Oh yeah, and by the way, if you have any questions, I'm seeing a couple questions streaming in that I think I'll answer here in just a moment, so I'll wait for now. But as you have questions, go ahead and ask them in chat, I'm keeping an eye on chat as we go along so I can answer right there and then. But the tool that we're looking at today is called Conditional Love. It's available. It's open source on GitHub. It was created by a gentleman named Daniel, and I'll show you his profile in just a second. And he works at a company called Quadrillion. And so they made this open source through their organization. Everybody can access this. It's fantastic. Thank you guys for creating this resource. If you want to learn more about the author, you can click on the profile here, and then you can learn more about Quadrillion as well. But this is an AWS metadata enumeration tool that can help you enumerate things like resource tags. And so if people are storing sensitive data in resource tags, which is a big no-no, you'd be able to enumerate some of that information under certain circumstances. You can also enumerate things like account IDs, and we have a totally separate lab that covers that as well that I'll talk about at the end of the stream. And then finally, what we'll focus on today is the organization ID enumeration. So it's got a little bit more information about how it works, how to get started with it, usage, all those parameters, how to get it installed on your system. So you can use pip install since it runs via Python code. You can install the requirements, and then you can create virtual environments, and you can launch the tool, which I'll show in just a moment. And then this kind of shows you the usage details and so on. So we'll come back to this, and we'll take a look at this Python script right here, which is where all the magic happens, and we'll actually deconstruct this code and see exactly how it works. And I'll give you a couple of pro tips as to how that goes. So going back to our lab page here, we can see that we've got our credentials ready to go. So we get back an access key ID and the secret access key, and that's going to simulate what I was just talking about on this page here. So we've got our IAM user, and then we've got our access key right here, which is this guy here. So I'm going to use this information via the AWS CLI, which I've got pulled up over here. Now this is the maximum I can zoom in, unfortunately. So let me know, and I can zoom in through the streaming software if you can't really see my code here. So if you don't mind giving me a thumbs up or dropping a comment if this is too small, I'd be happy to zoom in a little bit more. So I can't remember if Conditional Love accepts or uses profiles. So instead of setting a profile for this, I'll just use the default one, and we'll paste in our credentials there. If you're not familiar with the AWS CLI, by the way, if this is foreign to you, I did another live stream that deep dives into the AWS CLI, so I'm not really going to explain that in this particular live stream, but we do have that on our YouTube profile if you are interested. So I'll paste in my credentials, and now we are in this environment. We can run get caller identity, and we'll see that we are user Daniel. So this is just a pre-deployed user. Again, going back to our diagram, that would have been the user that our client in this particular scenario created for us. Now this user, like I said, is going to have access to certain roles in this environment. I'm not showing all the enumeration steps because we have plenty of other labs that focus on enumeration. So we're skipping all of those steps, but we do have content that teaches that. So if you are interested in more enumeration type stuff, we've got that on Cyber as well. So I discovered through enumeration that I have a role named S3 access images. And the way that I can filter down to that particular role is I can either list all the roles in the account, which could be hundreds of different roles, or I can filter down using this query right here. And that's going to be the wrong role name from just auto completion. Instead, we are interested in S3 access images. So we'll press enter. And we can see that that role exists in this environment. Again, this is in the same AWS account. So we've got our role name of S3 access images. We've got a role ARN, which is going to be that unique identifier. I'm actually going to copy and paste this in my notes. So let me just put that over here so I can paste that in properly. And because we will be using it shortly. And then after that, we can look at the assume role policy document. This is the trust policy that says who can assume this role. We have an effect of allow with our principal user Daniel, which is going to be the same as this user right here, which is fantastic news. So we are allowed as this user to assume this role, but we don't know what the role does yet. So instead of proceeding, we can list and enumerate the role policies by using this command right here, which is going to be AWS IAM list role policies for our particular role name. Press enter. And we'll see that this role has a policy named access S3 bucket objects. So now we can retrieve that role policy with the following commands, making sure the parameters are correct. So we've got access S3 bucket objects, and then we have our role name of S3 access images. We'll press enter on that. And so now we can see what that policy allows us to do on this particular role, which is going to be the following actions of S list object, or S3, excuse me, list object, S3 get object, and then our resources for this particular bucket. So bucket ARNs are great because they give you tons of information. In particular, they give you the name of the bucket itself, which in this case is image.cyberlabs.io. We have it twice in here because list bucket requires this ARN format, and then get object requires this ARN format. So just in case you want clarification on that. Any questions on this so far? Are we all on the same page? Because the magic is about to happen. So I want to make sure that we understand everything that's going on now, and then we'll submit our call after that. Thank you. I'm not sure if it's pronounced Abin, and Daniel. Appreciate the comments letting me know this is visible. Thank you guys. That's super helpful. Let me know if there's questions. If not, we'll go ahead and submit the call and watch the magic happen. And as we can see here, it is pre-populated for me, which is really nice. I just have to double check the values. I think that's the wrong ARN. So we want to copy and paste that ARN I got previously, which is going to be this guy right here. And then we've got our target is correct and our alphabet. Okay, so what's going on here? Before I press enter, what is happening? Well, I've downloaded the conditional love Python script that we were looking at previously from that GitHub repo. I've installed the requirements. I've done all that behind the scenes. Now I'm calling the script and I'm passing in parameters or arguments. We've got our role ARN right here. So this is saying I want this tool to use my user's credentials to assume this specific role. So going back to this guy here, I'm using my user's credentials in order to assume this role named S3 access images through this Python script. I'm going to target that S3 bucket that we discovered through our enumeration here. I'm going to use an object of S3 head object. We'll talk more about that in a moment. I'm going to use a condition of AWS Resource Org ID. We'll also talk about that in just a moment. And then I'm going to pass in this alphabet. Now the alphabet is customizable, so you can add or remove characters if you want to. This entirely depends on what you're trying to enumerate. Because we're trying to enumerate organization IDs, we're going to need all of these characters here because organization IDs in AWS can include dashes, can include numbers, and can include alphabet characters as well. So we want all of these to be in here. And so this tool is going to use that alphabet in order to try and brute force this situation. So let's go ahead and press enter, and then we'll talk a little bit more about what's going on behind the scenes, because this does take a couple of minutes to go. And of course, my autocomplete did not like that. Oh, come on. Sometimes when I have this autocomplete, it's great when it works, but in other cases, it just kind of breaks the formatting for whatever reason, like it adds encoded characters or whatever, and it just breaks calls. So we'll just copy and paste instead, but it's basically the exact same call that I was talking about. So now it's going to go through and it's going to start enumerating the information. This takes approximately like a minute, minute and a half to 2 minutes. So we'll talk more about what's going on behind the scenes here. But as you can see, it's already starting to print stuff on the screen. So we have an O, which makes sense because organization IDs always start with O and then dash. So when this captures that information, we'll see the O dash. And then after that is when it starts becoming unique. So there it is. We've got O dash. And so now it's going through and looking at all these characters and attempting all these characters. And as it discovers which ones are valid, then it's going to output that on the screen. Okay, so this is what is really cool about this tool, because if you just try to brute force every single organization ID that you thought was possible, you'd be looking at just an insane number of potential combinations. It would just not be feasible. It would take so many years, like probably 100 years, to get through that entire list, that it wouldn't even make sense to try. Instead, this tool uses a really nifty technique that makes this down to just a few combinations instead. That drops it down to a couple of minutes. Before I show you how that works, any questions so far? Anything I should clarify on before we look at the actual code and how this all works? Are we all on the same page? It's pretty straightforward so far. Let me know in the comments. Awesome. Thanks for the feedback. Appreciate it. So let's do this. Let's go in here and let's do a couple of things. First, I'm going to open this up in Visual Studio Code so that we can take a look at what's going on. And then I'll show you a couple of things that I actually prefer doing. I use VS Code frequently as well, but I also use some other tools that we'll call them the pro tips of what I would recommend. So if we open up this file, this directory, and we open up that conditional love.py, we can take a look at what's happening within this code base. So first things first, we've got our supported actions, or conditions, I should say, and then supported actions after that. So for our supported conditions, we were looking at resource org ID. So it's going to be this guy right here. And then for our supported actions, we are using S3 head object. So here we're just defining our main function. So we're going to be using Bodo3, the Python Bodo3, in order to create a base session. So this is managing all the credentials and whatnot, doing some basic sanity checks to make sure that it has correct credentials and everything's working properly before it actually runs our search. So this is, if you're not familiar with Python, this might look a little bit crazy. I added a bunch of comments in here so we can kind of go line by line and see what's happening. And then I'll connect that with the CloudTrail logs. And I think it'll start to make a lot more sense as we connect the two. So if I'm kind of losing you in this section, don't worry about it yet. I think I'll make a lot more sense in just a moment. So we have a couple of for loops happening here. And as you can see, there's an outer loop that we start with. And so this is basically saying that we want to keep going until we find the complete value or we hit 100 characters max. This is just setting an upper boundary. Within that loop, we have a second loop. This is called our inner loop, where we're trying each of those characters from that alphabet that we passed in with our call. So when we were doing this right here, this alphabet right here, and then after that, we're starting to build our string. So this is kind of what I was talking about as we're building our string here. And we can see that it finished, by the way, and it got the complete value right here. And what it will then do as it's using that alphabet and as it's building that string and that character set is it's actually going to generate an IAM policy by using a string-like condition using our test strings and wildcards as well. So if we scroll down a little bit, this is what the policy looks like right here from line code 69 all the way to 82. So we have an effective allow for an action that we passed in for all resources with a condition of string like, and then that's where it's basically constructing that string using our characters and using the wildcard. So as an example of what that would actually look like, because we're using AWS resource org ID from our call, from this call right here, condition AWS resource org ID, we're passing that in as our condition. Then we're constructing the partials. That's where it's taking the alphabet that we passed in and trying each iteration of that alphabet. So it's going to generate these IAM policies, and it's going to try to access that S3 bucket using those combinations of IAM policies. And each time it gets an access denied, it knows that it's the wrong character. But each time it gets access granted, it knows that it's the correct character. So it's going to go column by column, character by character, as we saw here. And each time it gets a success, it knows, hey, yep, 8 is correct. If then it moves on to the next character. If A is incorrect, B is incorrect, C is incorrect, D is incorrect, etc., it'll keep going until it finds the correct one, which in this case was Q. And so now it knows that it starts with O-8Q, moves on to the next character, moves on to the next character, and so on and so forth until you have the entire string that's valid. I'm going to pause here for a second. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into the AWS console and we're going to look at CloudTrail logs to see exactly what I'm talking about to cement this in. So while I'm doing that, try to digest what I was just talking about here because I know that's a lot. And then I will dive in to my console. Where did I hide that window? There it is. And we will take a look at that in CloudTrail itself to make sense of all of that. Okay, so CloudTrail, and I'll put this on screen in just a sec. Oops, wrong window. Okay, so we are now within CloudTrail in the same account. So you can see 4676, 4676. We want the account where we have our user and our role. We don't care about the account where we have the S3 bucket. So we are within this account, we are within CloudTrail, and we can go over to event history. And then we'll switch our filter, our lookup attribute to username. And if you remember, the username was David. So I'll press enter on that. Now, if you see no events yet or no matches yet, it can take a few minutes for CloudTrail to catch up. So what you can do is you can keep refreshing. And let me fix the zoom in on this. It's kind of atrocious right now. And you can wait sometimes up to 15 minutes for the stuff to come in, but eventually you'll be able to see the user and the details in CloudTrail. Also, maybe make sure that I am in the right account. Yep. So we'll just hang out and wait. CloudTrail is taking its sweet time. And then we'll be able to see it. So any questions on this so far? Yeah, I mean, thank you for the comment. I appreciate it. I'm glad this is helpful. So let me look at this comment you just dropped, though, because I'm curious to hear what you meant by that. Hold on, let me scroll down. Okay. So I also tried this method in the web server concept for brute forcing CTF. It can save a lot of time. Kind of curious to hear more about what you mean by that. Like, what did you end up using this with? Like, was there a web server that had access to an S3 bucket and you were able to use this for that? Is that kind of what you meant? If so, that's pretty cool. Nice work using that. Okay, so the events just came in. So let me switch back to that monitor or to that screen. So it took, I don't know, 4 or 5 minutes, something like that. In this case, was definitely not the fastest thing in the world. But once you refresh and filter by username Daniel, which is our current username right now in this account, then you'll see a bunch of these assume role events. What I'll do is I'll scroll way, way back, probably page like 6 or 7. And as you can see, there's a lot of these events in here. And let's just pick one at random. So I'll click on this guy. We'll scroll down a little bit, and we can take a look at what the conditional love tool did behind the scenes. It's kind of hard to see here, but we have a policy that's getting generated that I was just talking about in the source code. So you remember we have allow resource account, effect of allow for action of S3 star, resource star, and then we have our condition of string like. Let me zoom in just a tiny bit more. Not the easiest to see in this screen here. So we have our string like AWS resource org ID, and then you can see it being constructed here. So if I go back to my code that we were looking at previously, that's exactly what this is doing. We have our allow resource account, allow action resource condition, blah, blah, blah. So this is getting dynamically updated by the Python code, and it keeps adding these characters in. So let me go back even further. Remember what this looks like here. Let me go back even further. We'll go back to like, actually that might be from, no, that's not an earlier test, I don't think. We'll go back way, way back. We'll scroll down, click on this guy. Yeah, actually, I want to go even further back. Jeez, there's a lot of events here. Let's go, 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 go. Click on this guy. There we go. And so now an earlier test will display this. So like I was saying before, if you were to look at every single one of these entries, which I don't recommend doing because that's going to take you a few hours, but if you were to go through every single one of these entries, you would see it start with the first character, the second character, third character, all the way and trying all the alphabet stuff until it gets a valid access granted instead of access denied, then moving on to the next one, doing that on and on and on and on. And that's exactly what this code is enabling us to do. And so if we go back to our for loop here, so it's going to test the partial, create that policy, passing in our arguments action, argument condition, test partial, and tag key. And then it's going to perform that check. If it's able to access the target with that policy, success. If not, just keep trying up to a max of 100 characters. So that's exactly what this code is doing. Very simple once you actually look at each line and what it's doing, but also very clever. Like this is a very cool technique that Daniel came up with in order to make this happen. Now there's some other techniques in here if you want to take your time going through them. They're not necessarily as relevant to what we're doing here. You know, there is the action of S3 head object, which is the one that we used. You can also do stuff with data exchange, with Lambda, API gateway, and SQS as well. And so that's where that logic is to handle those calls, but not really relevant to what we're doing for this lab here. So I'll kind of leave that up to you if you want to spend some time looking at that. But does that make sense? Now that you've been able to see the code, the CloudTrail logs themselves, and also our call here and how it works. Does that kind of make sense? Any questions on that? Did I lose anybody? So Abin, I know you had a question earlier. I don't know if this answered it already. I'll put it on the screen just in case. But just to clarify, so you said, how will that work? Both of them are different users. There's only one user being used here, and you don't even have to have a user. It could be through a permission set or something like that. All you really need for this to happen is you need to go back to wrong window. I told you guys I have way too many windows. Here we go. You don't even necessarily need this user or this access key. You just need a role that you can assume. That's all this tool needs, is some sort of role that is assumable by your credentials, whether that's through permission sets, through an IAM user, whatever, maybe even another role where you're chaining roles together. So this part is really just for the lab and for our scenario. The part that really matters is over here. You have to have an IAM role that has access to the S3 bucket. And that S3 bucket is in a completely different account, and you're trying to retrieve that org ID from there. Does that clarify your question? Does that make sense? Yeah, you want to wrap up of what I did? So to wrap up, let's see. Okay, so to wrap up, just a quick walkthrough of what we just did is first of all, we started off by getting credentials for our user through the lab page, right? We got our access key. We configured our AWS CLI using this access key. Then we enumerated the IAM role within that AWS account that we had access to. And we discovered this IAM role. We discovered that it had access to an S3 bucket that belonged to a completely different AWS account. Once we did that, we wanted to retrieve the AWS Organization ID. So we ended up using the tool conditional love via this command right here. So we issued this command, passing in our role ARN, passing in our target, and passing in some arguments that conditional love requires to function properly. And then it did the magic. It went and it tried a bunch of like hundreds, probably thousands of IAM policy configurations until it found the one that granted complete access, which equated to this organization ID, which is our correct organization ID for that S3 bucket. And so now we know what organization ID this bucket belongs to. We can compare that to see if it belongs to the same client that hired us or if it belongs to a third-party organization, and go from there. You know, discover and make sure that they were able to access this S3 bucket. It's supposed to be accessible, and so on and so forth. Kind of wrap up the investigation after that. Does that make sense? Is that a good wrap up? Anything else that you're not as clear on? Perfect. In that case, let me start wrapping up here. Let's go back to our slides real quick. And so I've got links in here for this. I've got a little bit more information about resource org ID and how it works, and the fact that it's a condition key that you can use. And then I've also got a couple other free resources that will enhance this lab, but also its adjacent labs. Like, for example, if you want to apply a slightly different technique that allows you to discover the AWS account ID via S3 bucket. So instead of organization ID, if you want to figure out what the account ID itself is, you can also do that using a different approach and different technique. And so we've got a lab on that. And then Daniel, the guy who created this tool, came on a live stream, I think it was last year, late last year, and we talked about what hackers know about your AWS accounts. And so there's a lot of this information that can be publicly accessible that a lot of folks don't realize is publicly accessible about their AWS accounts, including role names and stuff like that. And so we did a live stream that walks through some free tools you can use that help you discover that, basically what your attackers can figure out easily and accessibly without even having credentials to your account. And so I'd recommend going through this live stream. It was really entertaining, really fun. I had a great time having Daniel on the show. And so you'll be able to access that as well. And then finally, if you're not already on Cyber's Discord, it's free. Highly recommend you join in. We've got a bunch of people talk about this stuff on a weekly basis. Go to cyber.com/Discord. You'll be able to join for free. You don't even have to have a Cyber account for that. And then also, if you want to connect on LinkedIn, if we're not already connected, you can scan this QR code. I share a bunch of cloud security tips and tricks and just general content on LinkedIn. And I do these live streams there weekly as well as on YouTube. So if you want to find us on YouTube, this will be available for replay there. Just find the Cyber channel and then go to our live tab, and then you'll see this live stream and all our prior live streams as well. I hope this was helpful. If it was, drop me a like. I appreciate it. And if you have any follow-up questions that I didn't cover in this session, hit me up on Discord or on LinkedIn. I'm very active on both of those channels. I'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have that you want to ask offline. Otherwise, thanks for spending some time with me today. I appreciate it. We ended a little bit earlier than I was expecting, which is great. I'll give you some time back. And I'll hang out for a couple more minutes, see if there's any additional questions at the end. Also, I forgot to mention, we do have another live stream next week. So if you want to go to Luma, let me pull that up for you. Oh, and I'll share the link to this, of course. So we'll do share. You want to view. So let me paste this in. So the first link is going to be this presentation, this slideshow that has links you can click on. And then the second link I'm going to share here in a second is going to be our Luma, which is for our events page. And on Luma, you can register, so you can be notified whenever we are posting new events. Of course, if you follow me on LinkedIn and YouTube, you can also get notified of that there. But Luma is kind of our dedicated events area. So there's that link for that. And so our next session is going to be pretty fun. It's going to be security automation in AWS. So it's called AWS Security Automation, Detect and Quarantine Suspicious Activity, which actually ties in pretty well with this. Like, how can you look at CloudTrail log event patterns, and how can you set up automation to detect that pattern and then lock it down, especially for IAM stuff. So this session will be very focused on IAM, looking at some indicators of compromise and acting directly on those indicators of compromise to shut things down, quarantine, and send out notifications. So highly recommend that one, especially if you're more interested in the blue team side of things. But also on the red team side, you need to understand how your actions make noise in logs and how defensive teams will respond to it. So I'd also recommend it, even if you're more on the... What do you mean I'm muted? Really? Are you sure? I don't think I'm muted. I didn't change anything. Make sure you didn't disable your speakers. That's also entirely possible. But yeah, hopefully I am not muted. So anyway, I'm going to end here though. That's basically all I was going to share. And yeah, looking forward to seeing you guys in other live streams. Hope to see you next week. But again, we've got multiple live streams coming up. We're doing them every single week right now. So even if you skip next week, I will probably see you very soon. Thanks everybody for joining in today. And I hope you have a great rest of your Tuesday.